Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tablas Creek Instagram Live conversation. I am your host, Jason Haas. My guest this week is a friend and fellow second generation wine person. It's Andrew Murray from Andrew Murray Vineyards down in Santa Barbara County. And I cannot wait to dive into Andrew's story. He's got a fascinating one that parallels mine and ours in a bunch of really interesting ways. But while we are waiting for people to sign on, as I always do, I want to share a few pictures and tell you a little bit about what we're doing here at Tablas. So it is absolutely beautiful here. This has been just kind of perfect weather for the last couple of weeks. Lots of sun, days in the 80s. This is a picture I got yesterday. It's kind of like solar power in all of its forms. But it has led to a lot of really beautiful growth in the vineyard. We are deep into flowering. So this is the bottom of the hill of our Grenache block. So you can see even there, it's flowering. We're seeing flowering in just about every grape. At the tops of the hills, we are even seeing tiny little grapes. We're done with flowering at the very tops of our early blocks. So that's moving well. We probably got another 3 or 4 weeks of flowering before we're totally done everywhere, but so far, so good. We are still doing a little bit of cleanup in the vineyard. You can see we're trying to crimp and mow to get the free flow of light and air through the vines. One of our no-till blocks. It's a block of Syrah. And then we are also bottling. So we've got the bottling truck here at Tablas for the week. We are putting our Patelin Blanc into bottle. So those of you who have been waiting for the 2024, I know we've been out of it here at the winery for a couple weeks. It is on its way. I got this cool picture of a case sliding down off the bottling line. What else? I think that's most of what we have going on here. We've also been working on a new approach. For those of you who have come to visit the tasting room in the last couple of weeks, you'll notice that we moved those signs. We've added a bench, nice place to sit, good place for photos. It's looking good. So this is one of my favorite times of year here. Not hot yet. Sun's out. It's warm. It's gorgeous. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Now I will invite Andrew to join, and hopefully this will all work as smoothly as it did yesterday. So I'm sending through the request now. Hey, marvelous.
Even better than yesterday.
I know, first try. How you doing, Andrew?
I'm wonderful. I love getting caught up on everything Tablas Creek, so I was there listening to all of that. We've got some of the same stuff going on at our place.
Yeah, are you in a roughly similar time frame, flowering and all that?
We're a little bit behind. We're a little bit cooler, a little more coastal here. So we grow quite a bit of Sauvignon Blanc, which is not a Rhone variety, but we sell those grapes. Use it in our Qupe program as well. And those are well through flowering, but some of our like Mourvedre, not close, Grenache, just barely starting. We've got a few primordial berries in the Grenache Blanc. That's about it. So we're a little bit behind.
Cool. Okay. Well, I definitely want to dive into all of that, but I want to start sort of at your beginnings. Like, I know you grew up in a foodie family. Your parents ran restaurants. But like, how much was wine a part of like your life and the family table when you were growing up?
Oh man, I did grow up in a restaurant family. I learned to walk in my parents' restaurants in Long Beach. There's pictures of me crawling up on carpet rolls as they were just installing carpet in Torrance, in San Pedro. To be honest, I was really young in the years that they owned their restaurant business. They certainly had a passion for all things wine and thankfully all things French. Despite being in the Mexican restaurant business, I know it doesn't compute, but I like to say that my parents sold tequila to help their son get into the fine wine business ultimately. And it's mostly true. Where the fine wine, Jason, really came into play was through travel. So my folks loved to travel. They sent me to a school that forced me to learn French in Corona del Mar. I say forced because it would have been a much more obvious language to learn in California, Spanish.
Right. They didn't even offer, like, our kids didn't even have the choice of studying French at the public schools up here. They got rid of the whole French department a couple of years before they started.
C'est dommage, as
C'est
the French
dommage.
might say.
C'est vrai.
So yeah, I was forced to catch up, had to get a tutor, and then we started a bunch of foreign wine travels and ended up in Burgundy in the late 1980s, early mid 1980s, really. And it was when like Peter Mailly's book, A Year in Provence, was like super popular, and Americans were really curious about the Provençal lifestyle and the French paradox and just everything French. So we leaned in on that and ended up in Vézelay in Burgundy and drinking, of course, Burgundy, which no one in my family liked, including my very young 15-year-old self. And then someone gave us a sip of Condrieu, Philippe Faury Condrieu. I tell this story all the time, but it's 100% true. And this very snooty French, wonderful human being, the sommelier, said, "Oh, can you taste the peach and the apricot and the golden hues and the nuttiness?" And I'm like, wow, I actually can.
Yeah,
Maybe I'm supposed to be doing this in life. And that set me down my Venice pathway. That right there, a sip of Viognier.
I love it. I love it, and I think Viognier is such a great grape for that to
hundred
happen with,
percent.
because the flavors are really pretty intense and recognizable. My first grape where I recognized the flavors was Gewürztraminer, which, like, sort of the
Even
same
more obvious.
same thing, right?
It took me a
So
while to know how to say Gewürztraminer, let alone know what it tastes like or how to experience it. But yeah, Viognier, I always thought it was a bizarre first grape to fall in love with, but it's so obvious. It's sweet, not literally, but smells of things that remind us of sweet, things that I think Americans are predisposed, especially young Americans are predisposed to appreciate and enjoy. And it's like a no-brainer now that I'm old and wiser. But at the time, it seemed like an odd grape to fall in love with. And people make fun of me for that being my first grape. You're supposed to fall in love with some benchmark Burgundy, and there we were in Burgundy thinking, man, this stuff's terrible. And now it's my favorite place to go and visit and consume. I think I sell Rhone wines. It's like an arbitrage, so I can buy white Burgundy.
right.
So people keep buying, please. I love white Burgundy.
So was this so when you were 15? Was this before your parents had bought the property up in Santa Ynez, or was this like a whole part of that process?
It was all happening around the same time. My dear sister, Bonnie, is was going to school at the bottom of the pass at a school for some kids with some special needs down there, and so that's what explored or had my parents come up here to explore the area in the first place. And like they were apt to do, they drove over the 154 one day and into God's country. And I still remember my first drive into the San Ynez Valley over the pass and by Lake Cachuma, and thinking how is this so close to Los Angeles? How is this so close to civilization yet so far away? So they fell in love and bought a property behind Zaca Mesa in right around probably 1986, 1987. I think escrow closed around 88. It's when my folks sold their restaurant business,
Right.
and Dad moved to Paris to pursue his lifelong dream of learning how to cook French food. So he went to the Ritz Escoffier program. And I think he was the first American to graduate that program in the Ritz. Very exclusive program, but that was his arbitrage. Sold his Mexican restaurants, bought a fax machine, and moved to Paris.
And you moved to Santa Barbara wine country.
Well, to be honest, still at that time, we were still in Rolling Hills and Palos Verdes, where I was
Oh,
still
okay.
in high school. So I was, probably 16 years old now. And they sent me 2 years in a row to boarding school programs that also seemed like punishment, but I loved them after the fact. One in Gruyere, Switzerland, which was an intensive class or course to learn French, and then one in Zermatt, Switzerland, which was part of a high school exchange program, which is in German part of Switzerland, but we had French tutors and French teachers there, so we continued that, or I continued that pursuit. And I'd go visit Dad in Paris, like on the weekends, and they had restaurateur friends in Switzerland. I would go visit them on the weekends. It was this really bohemian, free upbringing. It was pre-cell phones. I remember, not being in contact with my parents for long periods of time and just running around trains and like missing them and catching them and all around Western Europe. It was pretty wild days for sure. Pretty nice way to grow up. I didn't know it at the time that I tell my parents they raised me to be a winemaker. I was exposed to all this good food, all this good wine, and it just developed into a passion for all things French, and specifically all things from the Rhone Valley,
Cool.
truthfully.
So, can you
Including
talk?
early visits to Beaucastel. I mean, the Perrin family were like certainly inspirational. I mean, as they are to so many people in the wine business. But early visits to Michel Chapoutier, Beaucastel, um, Gerard Jabelet, Jacques Reynaud and Reyas, Henri Bonneau, back in the day when these guys were still alive and local
Right.
legends, and absolutely an awesome upbringing, awesome education, just, from being a French translator, really for my parents, a young French translator, but by osmosis, drinking in all this wine and drinking in all this European culture. It inspired me for
Yeah,
sure.
sure. I mean, what also sort of a background to help you develop independence. Like that's a
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So can you talk a little bit about, it sounds like you had sort of an interesting college journey also. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I went to a small private high school that I felt sort of prioritized where you matriculated to, like above so much else. And I knew already that I wanted to go to Davis, but it just didn't seem like a perfect fit for someone to graduating from my little school. And when all my friends were going to Harvard and Stanford and Middlebury and Brown and you name it. So I went to Berkeley. Um, didn't like it at all. I did a year at Berkeley. I like to say it like I did time. I did time at Berkeley. Go Bears. Um, Fleshed out some of the early sciences that Davis was going to require for a transfer. I love to tell people I dropped out of Cal. It's part of my mythology, but I'd already transferred to Davis. And in that process, I met Roger Bolton up at Cal Poly. I'm very involved with that. I'd love to talk about Cal Poly at some point, but this is still UC Davis. I met Roger Bolton, incredible, Dr. Bolton, incredible wine scientist, incredible human being. And he had a friend in Australia and said, you're coming in late to this program. Why don't you get your internship out of the way? And so I actually did my internship when I was just 18, turning 19, in West Australia, at a recommendation from Roger Bolton. And I thought I was going there to work with Shiraz, and I made mostly Rhine Riesling and very cold climate Cabernet, and a little bit of Great Southern Chardonnay. That was a trip. So I didn't get to learn very much about Shiraz. Drank a lot of Shiraz from South Australia, but we just didn't make it there. Not much anyway. But that was an incredible education. It was a few-month internship that turned into almost a year. Overstayed my visa, took it from an unpaid internship to an under-the-table cash paid internship, and literally stayed almost 9, 10 months. And it was transformational. That's what really sort of cemented. That's what melded everything I was eventually going to learn at UC Davis and sort of gave me a foundation on, not just looking at a pump through a textbook. Actually, there was no textbook at Davis at the time. It was just printouts that came after I graduated. But to learn how to use a pump by literally setting up a pump,
Right.
was transformational, and it sort of led me to my ultimate passion for supporting Cal Poly, which I love to talk about. So
I definitely ask you about Qupe in a couple minutes.
I know it's
Um,
later. Um, but yeah, it was, and then we started planting our vineyard in 1990. It's in a location now called Demetria. And, that predated our ability to get your beautiful cuttings, I believe. When did,
yeah,
when
we
did
didn't
you
start
make your cuttings available?
we didn't start selling them until '96.
Yeah. So we have them now in our vineyard, thankfully, and we're thankful for all that hard work you guys, you and the Paran family, your father, you guys put in to get those cuttings eventually to the United States. I mean, it certainly opened up a plethora of choices of great clonal material, clearly with great fabled history as well. So, I mean, truth history, not just fabled. But yeah, so we didn't have any of that in the early days, and ironically, we got cuttings from Klein Cellars. We just had that lovely meeting, the original or the old school OG Rhone Rangers at your place, and it was so fun to be able to share that story with the Kleins that they misidentified their Syrah cuttings and sold us, misidentified their Viognier cuttings. It was actually Syrah. So the first vineyard we planted, because of our Viognier inspo, was, we thought, Viognier, and 3 years later it all turned red, turned into Syrah. It was pre-genetic testing. So we had Dr. Cleaver, a professor of mine at Davis, come down, and he looked at the leaves and said, "Duh, you've got Syrah," which I'm pretty good at looking at leaves now, but at the time I couldn't tell you a grapevine from a rose bush. I'm pretty sure, but I've gotten better. I've gotten better.
Rosebush is the one with thorns.
Yeah, it's true. I feel like grapevines are thorny as well. It's just they're not on the outside.
Psychologically thorny.
Yeah, they
Uh,
are psychologically thorny.
so, did you start making wines from that vineyard while you were still at Davis?
I did. That's a true story. We made our first vintage in '93, very small, in our own winery, and more of a commercial scale vintage was '94. And I didn't graduate Davis until '95 officially. I had to beg my way out of there. Thank goodness I'd met my now wife, then girlfriend, and I was going to drop out, and she's just made me realize that she wasn't going to hang around with a college dropout. So it got me to beg my way out of there. I had taken my classes all out of order, like I've done everything in my life, very much out of order, and I turns out I didn't have an actual degree, a graduation opportunity, because I didn't have enough,
Huh.
didn't have the whole spectrum of classes they required. Taken every wine class I could take, but I had to take more physics, which I loathed. I had to take more economics, which I loathed, because the wine business is not just wine. It's there's a
There's
business.
also a business part of the wine
Yeah,
business.
we
Yeah.
try to make it a business. It's not just a for-profit charity, but it feels that way sometimes. But so yeah, I didn't graduate there till '95. So I really had three vintages under my belt um, before I graduated, and those wines aren't great. And I'm sorry to people out there if you have any of those wines. I was really proud of them at the time, but we've certainly made better wines since '93, '94, and '95. In fact, '96, the very next year. I don't want to credit it to graduating from UC Davis, but that vintage was pretty darn good. And that's the year that we made our first roasted slope, which is what we did with that messy Syrah Viognier vineyard. And we were inspired by the greats of Côte Rôtie, of course. So yeah, that was that first year, and we've tried to make it every year since '96. So a few
Okay.
years now.
Yeah. Awesome. So, did it feel like Actually, I don't know quite the right way to ask this, but did
Cheers.
it did it feel like pressure that like from the beginning this was a winery that was named after you, or did that feel like a natural progression just based on where you were at the time?
That's such a good question, and no one's exactly asked it. I probably could use a few therapy sessions to really break this down. I remember the early days and being a very young version of my current self, the young Andrew Murray. My dad is James Murray, James Kenneth Alexander Murray. And so people would come to me and say, "Hey, is your dad here?" And I don't know if you ever got that in life, but it's humbling. I was also very proud to say, "No, I am the Andrew Murray." And now I'm very embarrassed to be the Andrew Murray of Andrew Murray Vineyards. No, I like to explain it this way. When you're 18, I feel like it's a genetic survival instinct that, you are your craziest version of yourself, your most aggressive version of yourself. It's probably a raging hormonal nuttiness. And I was offered the opportunity to name the winery the family biz at 18. And I'm like, of course it's going to be Andrew Murray Vineyards. I mean, what else is there? Is there any other choice? And it quickly became something I didn't regret. I feel like you throw in your name on a bottle. It comes with an incredible sense of sort of a there's a big gravitas that comes with that,
Yeah.
and that is always, I think, made us strive to improve, little by little through the years, always to do our best, to not bottle wines that we're not confident of, to declassify, sell bulk wine for things that we are not confident of. So not that wineries that don't bear their name don't do those very same things. It just made it really quickly obvious from the beginning that I couldn't fake it, even though I had imposter syndrome till I think about a week ago. It's starting to rev back up during this conversation. So yeah, it was the no-brainer to name it that when I was 18, but I wouldn't mind a do-over. But it precludes the obvious opportunity for family and children to follow if it's a first and last name. But Murray didn't sound great all by itself, and Andrew Murray sounded regal. In fact, I was called Andy at the time. It was my wife who's like, "Dude, you sound like a child. You need to grow up. You're going to be Andrew from now on." And so I give a lot of credit to my wife of 29 years that she had the forethought to make me sound more grown up than I certainly was, than I ever will be, I think. So,
Um, yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting thing to think about. I know the parents have gone through, like it was just Beaucastel, and then they did um, Perrin,
Famille
and then they
Perrin,
did
yep.
Perrin et Fils, and then they switched to Famille Perrin for a lot of their things. So they keep reinventing their tradition in order to incorporate future generations more smoothly.
Yeah, I feel, I was just in the Rhone, and it's so interesting to see, and I was in the Rhone with my family, as I was saying, in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And it was the beginning of a generational change there. And it was really cool when I was just there again. It's like there's another 20 somethings that are starting to come up. And I was at this big tasting in Decanter in London, and a very prominent figure of the Perrin family was pouring, but it was Mac Chapoutier was pouring at his family's estate for Chapoutier, right? Just across the way. And it was just so cool to see, even more generations coming through. And it's what was a big part of the inspiration when we first got in the business. I mean, it really seemed like a long-term generational family business. And it quickly became impossible. And my folks sold their land in '05, and I
Right.
moved on to just behind where I am now. And it was one of those things. It was the worst thing and the best thing that happened all at the same time. And
Because I remember
I
it was
think
big news. It was really big news when this happened. It
it was.
was
You know
within
what?
the world of Rhone
Yeah.
producers, at least.
It felt like a big door closing because we all had worked so hard from scratch to develop land, to plant 55 acres that seemed like this dreamland, dreamscape. I hadn't gone in years, and I just took my daughter like a couple of months ago, and she's like, "Wow, this is so beautiful, Dad." I'm like, "Yeah, we all know, you know." My father's passed. I know my mom has some regret, but the greatest thing that came of that was it was too small for all of us. We all had I had bigger aspirations than the footprint would allow. So even in 1998, we started making a wine called Syrah Tous les Jours, which transcended the property. It was from all over at the time because there really wasn't enough Syrah growing. I mean, it's hard to believe there wasn't enough Syrah at some point because now there's way too much, and we benefit from that every day. But we started Tous les Jours as a way to reach a broader audience, make a more affordable style Syrah.
Yep.
We were going as far away as Lodi at the time. We, at different times I was growing fruit on the just east of the 101 in Paso Robles with Tony Dominguez and his property, one of the oaks, Brave Oak, I think it was called. We had 10 acres there under contract. So we've been all over with that wine. It's now found incredible focus because there's all these 30-year-old vineyards that are just unloved and unwanted in Santa Barbara County, and all within about 5 miles of my front door. So we now farm and put all those grapes into that wine. But at the time it was, I always knew that we were going to grow out of that building. The building was built to look just like a little Provençal Mas, a little 5,000 case winery. We had our own little 10 or 8 spout monoblock, just like the French did. We had our own little aging cages. We aged without label. We just, without thinking why we did anything, we just copied
Right.
everything we learned in France because that was I'd been to more French wineries at the time than I'd been to domestic wineries, so I didn't know any difference. So that's what we did. But it wasn't a long term. It wasn't going to work. I now have a single tank at our new winery that equaled the entire gallonage capacity of the original winery, and I'll fill 3 of those and bottle our Tous les Jours out of that. So because I've got 4 of those same size tanks. And that's not like a source of pride other than saying like that wine gets out there.
Right.
I'm reaching a much bigger audience than any of us ever initially realized. I'm wearing I can see if we can see it, my Syrah shirt today.
Nice.
I'm forever proselytizing about Syrah. I, maybe you and I are some of the few left. And I probably more than you because you guys do a lot of blends. But we're proud to now make almost 18,000 cases between a couple of brands of Syrah and release it as varietal Syrah every year. We couldn't have done that if we stayed
Right.
where we were. So a door closed. We lost access to beautiful fruit just as the vines were coming into their magical, early first growth, early stages of beautiful, about 15 years old. But it was also the best thing. My wife and I got to grow our business to a point where we now think it's big enough that we are thinking about generational again. So we're
Right.
like back to where we started, where we think we've actually created something that the kids are likely to really get excited about and leave a real legacy behind. I'm getting old enough that I'm using the L word, the legacy word, and thinking about ultimately not working this hard. But that terrifies me too. But
And there's an advantage of having named the winery after you and not after a particular place, say, is that
absolutely, well
that
said.
more
Yeah,
close on that place, it you could shift, I think, maybe a little more fluidly than you otherwise would have been able to.
yeah. I think what was the most complicating at the time was we had built our entire sales pitch, our USP, unique selling proposition, around the domain model.
Right.
And when you switch from domain to negos to contract grower to ultimately coming full circle so many years later to really being back in charge of most of our grape sources, that's a big change. I mean, imagine Topless would lose quite a bit of identity if y'all just stop working with your vineyard. I feel like I know you guys and your wines. I'm a past club member. I'm a big fan. Enjoy your wines every chance I can. Thankfully, you guys make a bunch in different formats and make it easy to enjoy. But whatever.
Yeah.
It's just nice to be. It's nice to be of a certain size, I guess.
Yeah, and that's actually something I wanted to ask you about. I was going to ask it a little later, but I think I'll ask it now because it feels topical. Like it feels like sort of like we have done. You've always tried to think about making wines that can be entry points into your portfolio, but also into the category that we both inhabit. And I know, I mean, that was why we started the Patelin de Tablas wines 15 years ago. But like you had already done that with the Tous les Jours and some of the blends that you were doing. And I'm curious, like, is that how you think of it, or is it just a part of a pricing model that you think makes sense, or what's the how do you go about thinking about like the different aspects of your
Yeah.
portfolio and the pricing of them?
It is, again, my entire education was the French model. And, whether it's, you know, uh, uh, a state Bordeaux wine that's got their deuxième and their troisième wine, I'm seeing like fourth wines, it's like they're getting really creative because things are exploding in Bordeaux, at least from what I'm reading about. The same thing goes in the Rhone Valley, where you will do Saint Joseph, you'll do Crozes Hermitage, Hermitage maybe, and then you'll have Côte du Rhône, possibly. Now, like Vin de France is a super cool thing, which was not really much of a thing 20 something, 30 years ago. So, you know, uh, the idea behind it made sense because it's about we weren't really doing it as a young vine. A lot of folks will do it as a young vine way, like, hey, for the first 15 years, we're going to put our young vines over here into,
It doesn't work if all you've got is vines that are under 15 years old.
exactly. And then everyone around us was about, 15 to 18 years old, so, and 15 is still pretty young. So it was a silly number to even think of right now. But so, and then it really came out of this sounds so silly, but it's so true. I had friends just getting out of college as we were really releasing our first wines of any scale that was hitting restaurants and wine lists in Los Angeles area. And they were asking me, what should I be drinking? And honestly, I at the time, I probably didn't know that much more than them, even though I was making wine. I mean, I certainly knew a little bit more, but price came into the equation quite a bit. And they just said, hey, I'd drink more of your wine if it was more affordable. And I might even try Syrah, which like it was an upcoming variety 35 years ago, and it still is. But price seemed to be a big differentiator for people my age at that time, young 20 somethings, which is so weird because we're all so focused on young 20 somethings again today. And I don't know if price is a current differentiator, to be totally honest, but at the time it was. So
I
by making,
absolutely still is. I
okay,
think. I mean, that's one of the things that um, like I've gotten to dive into a little bit with some of the research for the organizations that I'm a part of, like Wine Institute and Wine America, and some of the other boards that I've sat on. Is that is the single biggest inhibitor for younger wine interested drinkers to drinking more wine, is that it is more expensive than beer and spirits at what are considered like equivalent quality
yeah.
level.
Yeah, I mean, I know that must be true. I also just think we need more good to great wine at affordable prices. I mean, I always joke with people when I'm in France, I can often find a Coca-Cola that costs more than a glass or a bottle of wine, and
Right.
it's true. And sad for them, but it's made wine culturally part of, a generational reality for them, a generational history. I mean, multi-generational. So lacking a wine culture, I think, yeah, price is a big barrier to entry. And so we've always just tried to make an incredibly authentic, delicious, and affordable bottle of wine. And not by doing anything different in our cellar, not by sourcing differently. We don't use bulk wine. We don't use additives. We're being very conscientious about making the wine. We frankly just charge less for it.
Yeah.
And you were talking about bottling. We're about to go into a 2-week bottling HE double toothpicks of our next two Azure. And that wine is as good as many of our darn single vineyard wines. And it's drives me crazy that I've got to sell it for so little, but that wine will be sold around the country, around the world, reach a lot of people. It'll make them really, really happy. I call it their Wednesday secret. When they want to be drinking a single vineyard wine of ours, they know that they've got this incredible bottle of wine that's they can buy from a lot of different places. I just got a stat handed to me from Albertsons, Vons, and Pavilions, and it's not a stat that I honestly, my 20-year-old version of myself just coming up making our 5,000 case estate grown wines was ever going to want to talk about. But Andrew Murray Vineyards, and with our new acquisition with Qupe, together we're 44% of all Syrah sold through an Albertsons, Vons, or Pavilions, which is only a Southern California chain. It's the smallest segment probably that they sell, but we're nearing a tipping point that almost half of all the wine sold is an Andrew Murray or a Qupe. I made that wine, and we couldn't be prouder of that. I
So
think
cool.
we're leading by example, making incredibly delicious, beautiful Syrah, authentic to the variety, trying to transcend it a little bit, with Andrew Murray making a more fruit forward style, with Qupe leaning into the crunchier style a little bit. It's sourced very differently. It's from up in mostly Arroyo Grande. So it tastes wildly different. But between the two brands, we're making a lot of Syrah, called Syrah, and under $20. I mean, it's like, that's the part where I cough and gag, and because it would be so much better financially if it were twice as expensive. So we've got to be careful. We don't have the marketing budget. We're not flashy. The coolest thing we've got is our Qupe moniker is cool since 1982. And, we didn't spend money on that. It came with the brand. I think Bob Lindquist coined that back in the day. So that's it, and Andrew Murray Vineyards has never changed label since its first. So, we invest on what's in the bottle and not some of the flashy exterior, because we just don't have the budget to do that. So,
And you also
yeah.
did a good job at the beginning of picking a design that doesn't feel dated. Like it's like you did well um,
Yeah,
way back
I know
when.
some of my neighbors. That's how they reinvent themselves every 5 to 7 years, is changing labels. And I hardly recognize some of their brands, and sometimes it's for the better. But
As a winery that has not changed its label since 1997,
yeah,
I sympathize. And
I knew it would be very relatable, which is why I brought it up. So I love that Tablas Creek is the same. It feels the same, looks the same. It's easy to identify and market. It's like it's
right.
predictable. It's predictably good, which is important too. So it's not just to be predictable. It's not boring. It's predictable and delicious. So it makes people happy.
And it's interesting because those same surveys that came out that said like what are the things that are barriers to adoption of wine, like the number one among younger wine interested consumers was price, and number two was availability. So the fact that you talk about like making that much Syrah and having it be accessible near where people want to go and buy it, they don't have to search it out, they don't have to do a separate order from an internet site. Like you're doing exactly what I think the category needs in order to be successful.
I hope. I mean, it would be great if there was price increase. We haven't changed the price since our first release in 1998. That's we've seen the price at market has gone up because everyone's changed their profit models. But honestly, our FOB to our distributors has not changed since '98, which we're proud of and embarrassed by.
That's amazing. Like it is amazing that you can do that and make it work. So it probably says something about the broader Syrah grape market.
It
But
does. It
okay,
does.
we are already like 5 minutes past what I normally try to keep this to. Do you have time to
Oh,
stick around for like two more questions?
I do. I don't know if anyone's tuning into us, but I'm enjoying this chat all the same. So even if
Awesome.
it's just you and me,
No, we've had pretty consistent people watching the
I
whole
don't
time.
know how it works. So, but yeah,
Okay, so I wanted to ask you, like, since, like, for about a decade now, you've had that kind of you took over the lease of that Curtis property as well as the vineyard there. So you've sort of come back to having an estate. Like you had an estate, and then for a while you didn't. Now you're back to having an estate. Like what has that been like going back to having that much of a home base?
Oof, it's amazing. And, you know, we owe it all to our, you know, our sort of silent partners here, the Firestone family, who were kind enough to, you know, throw me a lifeline back in 2005 when my folks sold and we moved to um, what we lovingly call a dilapidated building in the middle of the vineyard. And it's where the brewery started. You know, it's an auspicious location. There's a lot of great things have launched out of there. When we moved in there in '05, Fess Parker was using it as their white wine tank farm and really growing their brand because their own winery wasn't allowing that kind of growth. And now they've got this beautiful facility up in Santa Maria where we store our wine. They're a great neighbor of ours, but and then in was it 2014, Adam Firestone came to me and said, you know, we're looking at ramping down wine production. They'd just a few years earlier sold the Firestone brand to Bill Foley, and it was just this huge opportunity. You know, my wife and I went from five-ish employees to a lot more. And I don't want to disclose publicly. No, just kidding. It just a lot more, made our lives way more complicated, but provided so much of the opportunity to the point where we started making quite a bit of wine for other wineries locally because this winery is of a very good capacity. It's a 40,000 case winery. So as the wine industry was teetering a little bit and some of our larger custom clients were saying, hey, we can't, you know, we don't want you to make all that rosé that you made for us these last few years, basically. This opportunity to acquire Qupe came up last October, and it was exactly the same size as all the custom crush winemaking that we had been just winding down and separating from. And so it was this miraculous moment where this became an opportunity, something I always wanted, not always, but in the last few years wanted, or wanted the opportunity to grow and to sort of revamp, you know, make it all that it could be, because it's a beloved Rhone brand. And I think I think all of us Rhone gals, guys, people need to stick together and, you know, build each other up because we're a beleaguered category for sure, even if it remains my favorite wine. So it was this opportunity that just dovetailed perfectly. It was like the stars aligned, the clouds parted, and this opportunity literally fell into our laps. And I couldn't say no. I couldn't not try to acquire it. I couldn't let it go. It meant too much to me. It was my neighbor. Bob is someone who I admire greatly. He's been proselytizing for Rhone varieties since, you know, the early 1980s. I think most of us in this category, at least in Santa Barbara, southern central coast, wouldn't be doing what we do with, you know, if it were not for him.
I mean,
So
literally, he was the one who drove my dad and Jean-Pierre and Francois Perrin around to look at properties
yeah.
in '89. Like how, like you can directly connect that thread.
Yeah, and we got a lot of support from the folks at Foxen, from Bill Waltham at Foxen, who helped lay out. So, I mean, the money was super welcome, but you know the roadmap was that was that was it was the original Rome down here, and they, you know, got it up to a lot of people. We're so thankful and grateful that we're now that it's in our family of wine production. So we made the 2024 vintage on site here. We finished the 23 vintage Chardonnay, finished the 22 vintage Syrah on site, bottled it ourselves. Those wines are in market. We're super proud of that.
Yeah, it's so
It's
cool. We were so excited when we heard that
uh,
that you had that. First of all, it had been bought out of where it was,
uh,
and second of all, that it was you who did it. Um,
And I
just felt
remember you were amongst the so many that reached out and said congrats and good on you, and we are forever grateful for that support. So yeah, it's
cool.
not been
Okay.
easy, but that's a whole nother conversation. But it's been gratifying, and I love that it doesn't say Andrew Murray Vineyards anywhere. That's just sort of a liberating thing, and allowing, I think, even a more stronger presence for my two children to one day maybe jump out of their own lives and back into our family lives. So we'll see. We'll see. Hopefully, well, I know one of them's at work in DC. He's not watching, but my daughter might be watching, and she's up in Carmel today, selling wine.
Awesome.
Um, yeah,
Got to do it.
yeah,
Okay, so can you talk a little bit about your work with Cal Poly?
yes. Oh my God, that's so great. So my wife went to Cal Poly. I didn't. I said way earlier in this conversation, I was a UC Davis grad. Go Aggies, go Mustangs. But they came to us in Santa Barbara County early in the days of trying to raise money to get the facility built. And Jerry Lohr and the Resnicks at Justin had already signed on in a big way. They had, I'd probably call it 85% of the money, but they were coming up short. They were looking for support that wasn't yet forthcoming from out of the county. They were getting a lot of support from Paso, Edna Valley, points north. Big support, big family names. I love to say to people, just go to Cal Poly and walk around and see all the names on the walls. You can see how broad the support is. It's from all over California, not just Central Coast. So we were humbled and honored to be able to put forward a small naming donation. My wife and I looked inward. It wasn't a great time for us to commit to that, but we just so believed in a wine school in our backyard in the middle of, I think some of the best grape growing climate and soil, terroir on the planet. It would be crazy not to get involved. And a few years later, the place was built. We were offered, or I was offered an opportunity to sit on the advisory council board, for which I was greatly honored. And I was able to re-up last year. So I'm on my second term there. I'm on my fourth year of supporting Cal Poly, and it's a totally noteworthy and really important part of my everyday sort of calculation. I think about Cal Poly on the daily, and we think about other ways we can help. And we make their Syrah for them and donate it. So the Cal Poly labeled and branded Syrah is made by Andrew Murray Vineyards. They've planted their own, but that'll still take a couple more vintages, I think, to come into fruition. So we just find creative ways to get involved as a small family winery. Certainly less funded than some of the bigger names, but we definitely gave till it hurts, and we give till it hurts. We believe in that program, and it's getting traction. They're getting an incredible student body. They're growing their students. They're growing their professors. The research that they're doing is invaluable. The partnering with our local industry is completely invaluable. I'm talking from like great brokers to the gallows. The most storied families in wine are involved in Cal Poly. So we're a very small part, but like I said, it's probably one of my proudest things. And it certainly goes back to my L word, the legacy. Our names sits on something up there, and we're forever grateful and proud to have that affiliation. So we look forward to supporting it for a lifetime to come, and it will continue to give back to our county and to the wine industry in ways that none of us can even imagine right now. I mean, it's truly astonishing what they're teaching up there, and it's
It's
very hands-on. It was a different education than I was allowed at Davis at the time. Davis has evolved, but the great thing is there's rooms for both programs. They always say it. There's room for Fresno. There's room for international studies. Each of them have a little bit of a niche, and I feel like Cal Poly is going to be graduating kids, young adults, into a really hands-on approach, and they're really heavy into marketing, which is so important. You
Yeah, it
know,
was interesting. I was just up. I gave a talk at Davis last week, and one of the things they were saying was like, so we realized we're way behind what's going on at Cal Poly because they have a whole wine business track that we don't do. Like we're thinking of adding it. It's clearly so needed. but like they're looking at the cool stuff that Cal Poly is doing
Stay in
beyond.
your lane, Davis. Stay in your lane. No kidding. Good for the more we can educate
Yeah,
and turn our great country into more of a wine culture, the better. So
totally.
I want more learning institutions. And I'll tell you, a gentleman that I've been so honored to get to know, Jerry Lohr. I mean, so incredible for Paso Robles, so incredible just as a man, as a leader of his family. But he invests in schools all over. You know, he's invested in Davis. As are many of several other of our board members and investors at Cal Poly. They're not singling one university out. They're sort of betting on the wine industry writ large, and I love that. You know, they believe in Cornell. They believe in what's going on in Washington State. You know, opportunities in Texas. You know, let's grow the wine business. Let's not make it more exclusive or more rare for certain. The government's trying to do that all on its own. We don't need people to do that. So,
No, I agree 100%. I feel like that's a pretty good note to
yeah.
wrap up on.
And thanks for asking. I love to talk about Cal Poly.
Welcome. Thank you for your contribution.
And yeah, thanks for inviting me
You're
today.
welcome. How do people who want to learn more about what you're doing, what Andrew Murray Vineyards is doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
I hear we have a website. It's andrewmurrayvineyards.com. We have a beautiful Instagram run by my daughter and her marketing business. So it's at AMV Wine. I hear we're on Facebook, but I deleted that from my phone because that ages you, is what I hear. So I don't have that anymore, but our winery has it. And we have, an email list. We have a beautiful, like you, we have a beautiful winery, and luckily people love to come and visit. So we encourage you, if you've not been, come visit us. And if you're here because of Andrew Murray Vineyards, you guys already know how much we love Tablas Creek. I can't show you, but I'm in my library room and I've got beautiful bottles of Tablas Creek on my wall and Beaucastel. And right here in my corner, I put Clos de Tourelle, which is one of my favorite Gigondas estates owned by the Pran family. I'm a fan. I'm a fan of wine, but I'm a fan specifically of things that you guys do and the Pran family does. And so please go visit Tablas Creek. I'm sure they already have, but come visit me too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the respect is mutual. I love what you do, wines, but also the way that you represent the category, the region, and everything else. So anyway, thank you for taking a chunk out of your Wednesday to share your story, and look forward to catching up in real life soon.
I go into spreadsheets after this. This is the best part of my day. So thanks for inviting me. All right. Good to see you, Jason.
Cheers,
Take
everyone.
care.
Thank
All
you,
right.
and
Bye.
see you all in 2 weeks.